Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu. It's Thursday, June 1st. This is Africa 54. In Sudan, 18 people are dead in an attack on Khartoum's market after the army abandoned talks, and shelling and aerial bombardments continued unabated Thursday. Human rights groups are raising concern after Greek authorities were caught on film, apparently forcing asylum seekers into a life raft and abandoning them at sea. And as the UN calls for more participation of women globally in peace and security efforts, West African women are playing a more prominent role in the region's military effort to stop extremism. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The United States on Thursday imposed sanctions on companies it accused of fueling the conflict in Sudan, stepping up pressure on the army and a rival paramilitary force to bring an end to the fighting as ceasefire talks are at risk of collapse. The U.S. Treasury Department said in a statement it targeted 2 companies affiliated with Sudan's army and 2 companies affiliated with the rival paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, accusing them of generating revenue from the conflict and contributing to the fighting. Paul Ndiho has more.
Sudan's army suspended talks with rival paramilitary force on Wednesday over a ceasefire and aid access, raising fears that the 6-week-old conflict would push Africa's 3rd largest country deeper into a humanitarian crisis. The army spokesman said in a statement it had halted talks in the Saudi city of Jeddah, accusing the other side of lack of a commitment to implementing any terms of the agreement and a continuous violation of the ceasefire. Eyewitnesses reported on Wednesday that the RSF had expanded its footprint within Khartoum's Moran district.
The ceasefire has not done any good to us. Our safety cannot be guaranteed when we go out. We cannot go to the hospital or visit our relatives. The ceasefire is not for our civilians.
The clashes have destroyed everything, with public security deteriorating and tourism stagnating. There are no cultural and sports events, and all social and economic activities have been cancelled.
At least 15 people were killed and 30 injured after a projectile fell on a market in a densely populated southern Khartoum city on Wednesday. Meanwhile, the White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said on Wednesday the U.S. was serious about the peace in Sudan after Sudan's army suspended talks with a rival paramilitary force.
That's unfortunate. We want to see the fighting stop. We want to see the aid get in, and it's hard for that aid to get in to people in Khartoum and around the country that desperately need it, food, water, and medicine. So it's highly unfortunate that they chose to walk away.
Sudan has witnessed deadly armed clashes between the army and the RSF in the capital Khartoum and other areas since April 15th. The war has killed hundreds of people, displaced more than 1.2 million inside Sudan, and driven 400,000 others across borders to neighboring states, the UN says. Paul Ndiho, VOA.
For more on Sudan's war and its impact, I'm joined live via Skype from Houston, Texas by Dr. Kidia Daluk, Advocacy Director with Sudanese American Physicians Association. Dr. Daluk, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther, and thanks for having me.
Now, Doctor,
pleasure to be with you.
Right. The doctor, as you just heard from our news, the United States has today announced sanctions, economic and visa sanctions against the warring factions in Sudan. What effects would this have on those generals?
Thanks, Esther. Let me start by condoling those who have lost their families and, sending my wishes for well-being for those who are injured, and my words of sympathy to those who lost their houses, have seen it occupied by rapid support forces and by airstrikes from the military. People are divided into two. The first part are welcoming those sanctions, although they have said these have late to come. This should have come earlier, at the time of the June 3rd massacre in front of the military headquarters, or at least at the time of the military coup on the 21st of October. These have long been waited by some. The other group have been skeptical about those sanctions. Similar sanctions have been implemented against al-Bashir and his regime. And throughout 30 years, those sanctions have not affected Omar al-Bashir and his regime. He has prospered during those sanctions, either by communicating with countries like North Korea, China, Russia, etc. There are ways to evade those sanctions. So people are divided.
Mm-hmm. Doctor, you give a kind of not very hopeful picture here, but given that al-Burhan has made it clear that he's not willing to have any talks with the Hemeti faction, what do you expect will be the outcome of the Jeddah talks?
Well, let me be blunt that, so far those, talks have not been fruitful and they have been a failure. The ceasefires, Avi, you have heard from the report from civilians on the roads of Khartoum, they have not helped. People are still seeing the clashes in every day. The hospitals are being affected. There are no safe zones. I think if we are really to be serious about this, there should be a very high level of envoy, reporting directly to President Biden, led by, Secretary Blinken, and an international coalition to mount, a lot of pressure, not only to those two generals, but also to the region, to stop this war from continuing.
Doctor, we hope for the best for the people of Sudan who are suffering. Thank you very much. Dr. Kidir Daluk is Advocacy Director with the Sudanese American Physicians Association. Now to Senegal, where we have a court in Senegal on Thursday acquitted leading opposition figure and presidential aspirant Ousmane Sonko of rape charges and death threats, but sentenced him to 2 years in jail for corrupting the youth, along with the massage parlor's former owner, Ndeye Khady Ndiaye. It was not immediately clear whether the verdict would allow him to run for president in elections next year. Senegal's electoral code prevents individuals convicted of a criminal offense to run for political office. Sonko, 48, was accused of raping a woman who worked in a massage parlor in 2021 and making death threats against her. He denies wrongdoing and is boycotting court proceedings. The case has triggered violent protests on the streets of Senegal, with Sonko's supporters denouncing the charges against him as politically motivated, which the government and the justice system deny. Now, for more on Sonko's case, I'm joined here by my colleague Abdulrahman Dia. He is a reporter with VOA French to Africa Service. Abdulrahman, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther.
Now, first of all, the word corrupting the youth brings a lot of questions. So this is what the court has decided today. They are not charging him with other things, corrupting the youth. What does that really mean?
Well, I just say that a little bit around 10 days ago, when the prosecutor in his final testimony used that term, a lot of people were surprised and everybody was going to the internet to check what that was, or talking to lawyers and others. It turns out, yes, this crime is there, it exists. The problem is it was never brought before during the whole process, not during the investigation, not during the trial itself. It was basically at the end that the prosecutor said, well, Mr. Judge, if you are not convinced with the rape and death threats issue, the charges, then we want you to charge Ousmane Sonko with this corrupting youth charge. A lot of people were surprised, and today a lot of people are saying, well, since there is no rape or death threat, this is one more proof that the regime is working with the judiciary to keep Mr. Ousmane Sonko from running into the next elections.
So we know there have been protests in capital Dakar and other parts of Senegal because of this case. What's the reaction from Sonko's supporters? And like you say, is there any room for appeal?
Doesn't look like there is any room for appeal because this is a criminal court and Mr. Sonko did not show up. So a lot of lawyers and analysts think that there is no way to appeal unless the president himself decided to basically issue an amnesty or something of the sort. Now, the reaction was something expected. Now, what we have to watch out is how big of a protest or nationwide will it be? Right now, it looks pretty bad from many cities from what I'm monitoring, whether it's in Dakar and especially in Ziguinchor, there is already one reported death, which people probably have to confirm. But the worry is basically how big this protest will be and how long will they be. But there is definitely a lot of tension right now.
And when is the presidential election slated for?
Well, the election is the big issue, I think, and the fact that President Macky Sall has still not said whether or not he will run is contributing to this whole tension. And Ousmane Sonko's supporters are saying there is no question for him not to run. It is out of the question, and that's the issue to be solved. And I think it will be a power struggle between the regime and Sonko's supporters.
Oh, Abdurrahman, politics in Africa. Well, thank you very much, Abdurrahman, for your reporting.
A pleasure.
Abdurrahman Dia is a Voice of America French to Africa managing editor. East Africa's leaders have agreed to extend until September the mandate of a regional military force deployed to quell violence in the strife-torn east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. The seven-nation East African community began the deployment last November, with Kenyan soldiers arriving in the volatile region, followed by this year by Burundi, Uganda, and South Sudanese contingents. Its future had been in question, with the Democratic Republic of Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi accusing troops of cohabitation with rebels and hinting the regional force could leave by the end of June. But at a summit in Burundi on Wednesday, the EAC agreed to keep their troops on the ground until September 8th to consolidate gains made. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni on Wednesday defied international calls to rescind an anti-gay law seen as one of the world's harshest, including a potential death penalty for aggravated homosexuality. The signing of the bill is finished. No one will move us, Museveni said in a statement after a meeting with members of his National Resistance Movement party. His comments were the first since he signed the bill into law, triggering widespread Western criticism, including threats by U.S. President Joe Biden and others to cut aid to Uganda and impose other sanctions. However, Museveni was adamant that Uganda would not be deterred by this. Anti-foreigners organizations in South Africa marched to President Cyril Ramaphosa's offices at the Union buildings in Pretoria, demanding that all illegal foreigners must leave the country. A Zimbabwean representing groups of Zimbabweans who are targeted by the group's African Diaspora Forum chairman, Vusumuzi Sibanda, told VOA Studio 7, quote, that this has not started today. It's been going on for days, and this group is part of a larger group that was in court pushing for the ending of Zimbabwe exemption permits, together with groups like Operation Dudula, an association for truck drivers South Africa, and of course, Tuso Kumalo has more on this story from Pretoria.
The protesters behind me here have gathered at President Cyril Ramaphosa's offices in Pretoria to demand answers from him as to what are his plans about thousands of undocumented foreign nationals that have entered South Africa here over the years because of economic conditions in countries around South Africa and across the African continent. A lot of immigrants have come here in search of greener pastures And the protesters here are saying they are now responsible for the difficult economic conditions in terms of unemployment that South Africa is experiencing here. They want them out of the country so that South Africans can take over the jobs that they are having here. They are also saying these immigrants are responsible for a lot of crime that's happening in the country, and by leaving, they are saying they would have reduced the rate of crime that has gone to high proportions here in South Africa.
We need a mass deportation. That's the most thing that we want as South Africans. We want South Africans to be prioritized, especially in our healthcare facilities, schools especially, because we have kids who are still not placed as yet, and foreign national kids are being placed at schools.
Our country has problems, plenty problems, education, health system, everywhere. Even policing, we've got problems with that. Add on top of that the issue of illegal immigrants.
We're selling cakes, they coming and selling cakes. We're doing saloon, they coming doing saloon. So by me, it's very unfair if the foreigners can be here and sell a fed cook.
These protests are happening at a time when the economic conditions in South Africa have toughened because of the constant power cuts that have seen a lot of companies shedding jobs as they cannot operate full-time.
Tuso Kumalo reporting from Pretoria, South Africa. Efforts by VOA to get a comment from the presidency were not successful. However, President Cyril Ramaphosa has previously told the same protesters to express their concerns in peace and never to engage in acts of xenophobic violence. Greek authorities have been caught on film apparently forcing asylum seekers into a life raft and abandoning them at sea. Human rights groups have long accused Athens of such practices. Greece denies carrying out the so-called pushbacks and says it has launched an investigation into the video. Henry Ridgwell reports from London.
The video, published this week by the New York Times, purports to show a group of migrants taken to the shoreline of the Greek island of Lesbos on April 11th in an unmarked white van. The group of 12 includes several small children. They are led by masked men to an inflatable boat, then taken to a Greek Coast Guard vessel offshore, which then sails further away from the coastline. The migrants are seemingly forced into an inflatable life raft and abandoned in the middle of the Aegean Sea. They were reportedly picked up by the Turkish Coast Guard an hour later. The footage, which has not been independently verified by VOA, was filmed by Fayad Müller of the Austrian political organisation Der Wandel, who has spent several years documenting the treatment of migrants landing on Greek shores. He says he has witnessed many such pushbacks.
On average, it's every second day that the Turkish Coast Guard finds a life raft somewhere at the Aegean borders between Turkey and Greece. This is going on for 3 years. This is a major operation by the Greek state. So I had the idea, or the only solution was to get a video of these crimes and to publish it.
The Greek government denies conducting pushbacks, despite widespread evidence to the contrary. In January, VOA reported on the death of Turkish migrant Barış Buyuksu. Ankara says he died after being tortured on the Greek island of Kos and forced into a dinghy that was pushed back into Turkish waters. Athens denied any knowledge or responsibility.
We see the breaking of so multiple laws, crimes in Greece, like kidnapping, taking the freedom away from people, refusal of giving the people a fair asylum procedure, deporting them, and then, of course, the breaking of law on international as well as European level.
The New York Times says it tracked the migrants to a detention facility in the Turkish city of Izmir and said it verified the events depicted in the video. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis reacted, describing the video as a completely unacceptable practice, but insisted his government's migrant policy was tough but fair. Mitsotakis has called on the European Union to offer more help over migration. Analysts say there is little sign of any agreement.
Burden sharing is a question for many governments in the European Union, but I think they have resigned themselves in a way to the fact that they will not find a common solution, at least in the short term. And what's happening at the moment, in my view, is that this means that is every country for themselves.
The European Union has called on Greece to open an independent inquiry. Critics say the EU is already fully aware of what is happening on its southern shores. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Let us know what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, West African women step to the front lines in the war against terrorism. Stay with us.
From traditional poetry to contemporary poetry, African poets turn to creative expression in rhythm to grieve, celebrate, honor loved ones, or build identity. But in recent years, a growing number of young women from the continent are embracing poetry to speak up their rights. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we will look at how women are using poetry to tell powerful stories. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
From around the world, let's go.
In other news, the Sahel, Sudan, Burkina Faso, Mali and Haiti now join Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, Yemen as among the highest alert areas for food insecurity, requiring urgent action from the international community, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization and World Food Programme. Local authorities in Ethiopia and regional forces continued a campaign of ethnic cleansing in western Tigray, despite a peace deal ending the war in northern Ethiopia, according to Human Rights Watch. In a statement, Human Rights Watch Letitia Beda said the agreement in November has not brought about an end to the ethnic cleansing of Tigrayans in the disputed western part of Tigray. Zimbabwe's parliament has outlawed criticism of the government ahead of presidential and parliamentary elections in August, with violations of a new law punishable up by 20 years in jail. Opposition activists say the law, widely known as the Patriotic Bill, passed late on Wednesday and was designed to punish citizens, civil society organizations, and political adversaries of the ruling ZANU-PF party. The U.S. House of Representatives has approved legislation to suspend the government's borrowing limit until early 2025, a step toward averting a Washington political showdown 5 days before the country could run out of money to pay its bills. With a late Wednesday vote of 314 to 117, the bill now heads to the Senate, with passage expected by week's end and eventually Biden's signature at the White House. The measure suspends the government's current $31.4 trillion debt ceiling.
Tonight, we all made history, because this is the biggest cut and savings this Congress has ever voted for. And it's not that we're just voting for it. This is going to be law. $2.1 trillion.
Now, we're going to deal with the debt ceiling. I think things are going as planned, God willing.
Far-right Republican lawmakers had criticized the deal negotiated by Democratic President Joe Biden and Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy for not cutting enough in future government spending, while some progressive Democrats said it trims too much. The proposal before Congress includes waiving the existing borrowing limits until January 2025 and a 2-year budget deal that keeps federal spending flat in 2024 and increases it by 1% in 2025. The measure does not raise taxes, nor will it stop the national debt total from continuing to increase, perhaps by another $3 trillion or more over the next year and a half. As the UN has called for more participation of the women globally in peace and security efforts. In West Africa, women are playing a more prominent role in the region's military effort to stop extremism. US-led training is helping to bring more women to the front lines to win hearts and minds in terrorist hotspots. Henry Wilkins reports.
Earlier in May, female soldiers of the Ghanaian Armed Forces underwent a debriefing, recapping what they learned about women, peace and security at US-run Flintlock exercise in March. Lieutenant Colonel Jacqueline Ghali says the training helped her prepare for and understand why it's essential to have women on the front lines when countering terrorism.
I think that having women as peace builders on the team will help to curb the situation. In the form of providing some form of relief for victims of violence, especially sexual violence, because most of these acts are perpetrated by males, and so they will be more comfortable to talk about those issues to the females.
According to the United States Institute of Peace, Women, Peace and Security is a policy framework that recognizes that women must be critical actors in all efforts to achieve sustainable international peace and security. This can extend all the way from women accompanying male soldiers on outreach missions to terrorist-controlled villages to negotiating peace settlements at the highest levels of government. Flintlock, a US-led exercise held annually since 2005 to train security partners in West Africa, was held in Ghana and Ivory Coast this year. Both countries are grappling with terrorist incursions on their northern borders. For the first time, the exercise has made women, peace and security a central part of the event. Faye Kuvis is Deputy Chief of Staff for the US Special Operations Command Africa, SOCAF, which organised Flintlock. She says West African militaries had almost no capacity for women peacekeepers working on the ground before the training was introduced.
It is to work with our partners to build their civil military capacity, but from a female-forward perspective. In the U.S. And coalition partners during Iraq and Afghanistan, we called those teams female engagement teams or cultural support teams. So this is very much taking that same template, but implementing it with partners.
For example, in West Africa, cultural constraints around social interactions between men and women mean it is easier for female soldiers to win female hearts and minds in communities affected by terrorism. The UN is also making a push to involve more women in peace building and conflict prevention. As for Ghali, she says she is excited about playing a frontline role in Ghana's anti-terror efforts.
If you're a woman, accept challenges. And like the oath we took before office, you go wherever ordered by land, sea and air, even at the peril of your life.
As the global push